Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here today, and it's been very nice. I was sitting there as people were coming in to see so many old friends, and as William pointed out, it's 35 years ago that I started what was our first Guernsey fund. Of course, I was then only a boy, but I was also how can I put it? Pleased to hear from a fellow commissioner. Said to me, well, I think perhaps it's a good thing you're talking today. You know something about the subject, but more especially, it won't cost anything. And in that vein, I'd say I'm delighted to see so many people here today, and I thought perhaps it wasn't necessarily the attraction of the speakers, but the fact that everyone is a guest today. So, but it really is excellent to see so many of you here. William, thank you for your kind introduction. I think it was 2010, the Commission sent all commissioners to a sort of teach-in at the LSE where Howard Davis and Martin Wheatley and others of the great and the good were there to get us up to speed with the international regulatory scene and what was going to happen. And I must say, it put the fear of God into me, and a lot of that, I'm afraid, has been borne out. And I would just add that I think at that time, Howard Davis was, I think, highly critical of what was being planned. I'd add that since I've been in the Lords, I sit on the Lords EU Economic and Finance Committee, which obviously has people with a cross-section of views, but we mostly managed to be in agreement on quite a lot of critical reports, and I commend them to you. There's an extremely good one on the crackpot financial transaction tax, and we are in the middle of one on the impact of EU financial regulation, largely on the UK. And it has been fascinating to actually met with, interviewed most of the key players in the game. And on that front, I would say, although the EU is, shall I say, not my favourite organisation, I do think it has been extremely wise of Guernsey to have engaged in the EU with the EU. We really don't have a great deal of choice. But I think the regulatory scene has become a nightmare, and not seriously, but I sort of sat back and thought, wondered if there was any mileage in going back to growing tomatoes, but it is a huge challenge to Guernsey and to the Commission to keep up with everything, to deal with everything, where obviously we cannot have anything comparable to the resources of the UK in our regulatory activities. What I think is extremely sad is time was when I sort of discovered fairly quickly that if you acted with integrity, you were not going to be in breach of regulation. And that was very much Professor Gow's regulation. That is not in the slightest bit true today. You've got to be incredibly careful of all the detailed prescriptive rules and regulations. And I think, I look around all over the place, almost businesses have got to have compliance teams to appraise decisions on virtually anything to make sure that you're not committing a regulatory breach by a mistake. And what I think we've had happen was, time was that governments thought they could prescriptively manage everything. Do you remember, unfortunately, a Conservative government thought that it was the best placed to determine prices and incomes until that was blown out of the water. But unfortunately, that mentality has sort of switched across from government to regulation, and really government setting up regulation to be have to be detailedly prescriptive, where that usually means that the honest guys have to spend a lot of time and hassle to little purpose, and the crooks somehow or other find a way around it. And so I think, just to let you know where I stand, as a matter of principle, I think that the world has gone sort of regulatory mad, and often to not that much effect. And you should all feel sorry for we poor regulators, particularly in somewhere the size of Guernsey, where we've got to make the best of it. We've got to do what we have to do to keep the island in business. But we have also obviously cannot add to costs excessively, cannot have a huge bureaucracy, and so we have to be extremely sharp and balanced in actually how we do things and to make them very much sort of high-risk profiled. As you all know, we've got sort of layers of it. We've got the international layer, and I sort of include the US in that because the US influences, particularly in the anti-money laundering area, what is driven internationally. You've then got the EU picking that up and putting it into directives, adding its own things, and sometimes straying off in other directions. And then you've got the UK as well. And so, in essence, we are sitting here having to digest all of that and to work out what needs to be done, I repeat, to keep us in business. I know that William will be talking about it in much more detail, but we have all these organizations with names that one forgets, and the abbreviations of their name, you can't remember what they mean, but we've got FAT for FATF, we've got FATCA, we've got the FSB, we've got the GIFCS, we've got Basel, we've got Financial Action Task Force, we've got the IMF, we've got Moneyval, in Europe we've got ESMA, the EBA, we've got the JMLSG. Just name a few of the bodies which William will be talking about in more detail. And I repeat, it is stuff trickling down through all of that from which we have to determine here in Guernsey, both government and regulator, how we're going to deal with it. I think focusing on the EU, the sort of initial stage of EU regulatory initiatives was very much a sort of UK backdoor via the FSB, the Financial Services Board, and it was substantially stuff that the UK was going to do anyway, and then getting it done via Europe. And at that stage, believe it or not, sometimes I think the European Parliament actually reduced rather than increased what was being called for. And I think, interestingly, to this day, if anything, the EU is less consumer-focused than is the UK, and perhaps is Guernsey as well. But the EU then started to go down its own road. I think the first, to me, unfortunate development was AIFMD. What that was about was a sort of wrong view in the EU that hedge funds had somehow been a major contributor to the banking crisis. If anything, I think they actually alleviated it. And so you had to put tight constraints and requirements onto hedge funds. Of course, then we found that spilled over to virtually anything other than a UCIT. And so that then obviously trickles down to us here in Guernsey, and where I think getting full equivalence for Guernsey AIFMD is going to be important, because I've already noted funds from Asia that are getting themselves AIFMD approved so that they can market in Europe. Well, it would be a lot easier if they could actually achieve that simply through Guernsey. And so I very much hope that that development is going to work out satisfactorily. Then we had the EU put in their rules for senior executive remuneration, and again, allegedly to stop bankers overpaying themselves, but that turned out to be virtue for the whole industry. And the main impact of that has been to increase fixed pay, whereas actually flexible pay is a much more sensible arrangement. We're in the process of MiFID II, which I think is potentially a nightmare, particularly in the retail area, and is going to be quite a big issue for us to grapple with here. And finally, the foolish financial transaction tax is by no means dead. I have a feeling it probably won't ever happen, but it's still marked there on the diary. So what, if you like, is wrong with each of these? Well, AIFMD, as I've said, not only is it over the top, but it's brought in a whole lot of areas that I think should never have come in the first place. The remuneration thing has the wrong contrarian effects. And the financial transaction tax, if it does happen, is simply going to drive business away from London. I gather there's 144 more EU, at least secondary initiatives yet to come. God knows what they're all going to comprise. And also the EU is now out of sync with some of the international requirements. So if you're sort of receiving from both the EU and internationally, which way do you go? And in particular, that applies to Basel. Again, the investment management industry came through the banking crisis remarkably well, and yet it has been hit just as heavily, if not more heavily, than the banking industry, with additional regulation coming out of all of this. We've got particular problem areas too affecting, well, really the Crown dependencies generally. From the UK, we've got the ring-fencing policy, where at present at least, as you will all know, this will mean that the banking subsidiaries of the main UK banks will need to be subsidiaries of their investment banks, not their ring-fence banks. In practice, that may not matter that much, but it's a pretty crackpot position to have arrived at, I think. I think the EU, interestingly, and the UK have sort of gone their own ways in terms of what they're doing on the banking front. Where the main initiative in the UK, I repeat, has been the ring-fence banks. The main initiative in the EU has been Eurozone banking union and the ECB becoming the main regulator. And that really intended to somehow or other support the failing euro. I don't think it will do it because the resolution fund of 55 billion euros is wholly inadequate. There's no common deposit insurance. There's less intra-EU banking than there was before the banking crisis. And there's certainly no economic, fiscal, political integration on the scene. So I think the Eurozone banking union, in some senses for them it's a step in the right direction, but it still has a very long way to go. I think from the EU agenda so far, as I've commented, AIFMD is a big issue for us, but MiFID II is also going to be a major issue in terms of working out how to deal with the retail sector. Internationally, I think the main issue has been the FATF initiatives in terms of AML requirements, although I was horrified to note as well that it is a FATCA requirement, at least in the UK, for all trusts, even if they're UK trusts with UK beneficiaries, to register with FATCA. I can't see what on earth it has to do with the US at all. Again, I think most people aren't yet aware of that, but FATF and its excessive AML requirements very much comes from the US, that I think after 9/11 became paranoid, but hidden right now in legislation going through in the UK Smaller Companies Bill is the most ridiculous and ill-drafted requirement for public registers of beneficial ownership of companies in excess of 25%. And they found it impossible really to define in a proper legal way what that means. What does it cover? Is it just ownership? Is it control? Is it influencing boards? Is it through trusts? and there's going to be, I think, a nightmare yet to work out who it actually applies to. This is very much a Vince Cable agenda, although it's on the back of Cameron's commitment back in 2013. If it goes through, it's potentially, I think, both defective and damaging. It will kill the long-standing principle of legal privacy of private companies. It will leave the media available to make cheap publicity out of looking up what people own. It will be bad for business in that a lot of Chinese entities or Middle East entities willing to invest substantially in the UK will want that to be on a confidential basis. It's unclear how entrepreneurs will be covered, most of whom I think won't even know that there's such a law in existence. Worst of all, it doesn't actually meet the FATF requirements, so because there's no verification process. And so the argument that this yet further regulation is justified because it's meeting AFTF isn't actually true. It doesn't meet FATF requirements. So it's going to cost a fortune. The BIS estimate at least $1 billion, but it's up to about $6 billion, and there could be 3.5 million companies involved. And yet again, this is hassle for the innocent, but the guilty can get round it simply by using a non-UK company. And so again, I'm furious because it is a completely crackpot piece of legislation. I will be doing my best to oppose this in the Lords in early December, but I think that the problem is that too few people actually know anything about it. Where does it come from? Very much the NGO lobby, and yet ironically there are no such requirements on NGOs, and actually it has been NGOs that have sometimes been found to have involvements in terrorism. So again, what even a coalition government is doing listening to NGOs, I don't know. It's playing to the gallery, and my only positive comment is that I'm not sure that the legislation will ever actually be effective. And I'm glad to say that BIS officials admit they know where the problems lie and have also made it clear that they're not interested in extending it outside the UK. But I repeat, I think it is extraordinary that this government should be putting up such legislation. I think the other sort of bad news coming up is the EU fourth AML directive, where the EU Parliament has to some extent sought to jump on the bandwagon of public registers in terms of trying to get beneficial trust interests disclosed. I think here the Council and Commission are less keen and matters are under discussion, and there's a reasonable probability that what emerges won't be too damaging for us here. But where there is a problem is PEPs. People like me, politically exposed persons. And we've got the Treasury saying, oh, well, UK arrangements are supposed to be proportionate and risk-based, and not all MPs and Lords are PEPs. You've got the Joint Money Laundering Steering Committee saying, oh, no, anyone who is an MP or a Lord is a PEP. And moreover, so are all their families and relatives and children and close business allies. And moreover, you banks and fund managers, you've got to verify where everyone's wealth has come from. You've got to monitor every banking transaction. So not surprisingly, quite a lot of UK banks have been refusing to open bank accounts for PEPs and sometimes closing them down. And here I think a lot lies with the Treasury, and I'm in correspondence with Osborne. I've got on me letters from him saying, oh no, in essence, in so many words, the regulator in the UK is going over the top. This is supposed to be proportionate. So we'll have to see what happens, but Guernsey certainly will have to meet the FATF requirements with regard to PEPs. For the GFSC, can I sort of appeal to all of you that I think you should be extremely sympathetic and helpful. Imagine what we've got to deal with in terms of all of this and sorting out how we're going to handle it without costs spiraling out of control. And yet where at present there is no end in sight to excessive regulation being promoted both internationally and via the EU. And what it really means is that we have got to work harder and work smarter to deal with it. We've got to have a risk-based focus. I would pay huge tribute to both our chairman, Case Showers, and to William. I think they are very complementary individuals in that I don't think Case would be upset if I described him as a wise old bird, and I hope William won't be upset if I describe him as an extremely able workaholic. But I think that together they are steering Guernsey and the Commission in an extremely balanced and effective way when faced with all that we are faced with. As again you'll all know, we are now a much leaner and fitter regulator. We needed to put in an effective enforcement unit. We needed to put in online reporting and interaction in terms of dealing with our licensees. We have reorganized ourselves, put in a COO, and I think particularly William has turned the Commission into a very well-organized, effective creature. I think one shouldn't boast, but we immediately had to deal with a Moneyval visit you'll know about. And again, in case everyone doesn't know, it used to be the IMF. We spent ages getting ready for really it's Moneyval that has taken over. And again, yet another of these organizations where one doesn't know quite to whom they report. But I think the crucial point to understand is that going forward, we are taking a risk-based approach and applying that equally to inspections as to where we think the highest risks might lie. Can I also make the point, which doesn't always go down well, but I think it is crucial that the three Crown dependencies act together. I certainly know, seen from a UK Treasury vantage point, they really don't want to be speaking to three different organisations. They want one voice. And I think a couple of weeks ago we had our usual annual meeting with Jersey and the Isle of Man, and I've been to many of these, and it was a complete contrast to the previous ones. It was a really effective meeting, getting down to addressing the nitty-gritties of a lot of the things I've been talking about, and where there was really pretty much unanimous agreement. And I felt that was actually very good news. Can I, if you like, just step back now a minute and put all this into context in that most of the years I've been associated with Guernsey, the financial services business has grown enormously. The last 20 years grown at about 5% per annum on the back of really the growth of the City of London more than anything else. The last few years, largely post the banking crisis, overall business has been fairly flat, banking has been weak, the funds area fairly stable, insurance growing and fiduciary decreasing. And what we've moved from a climate that was benign to a challenging climate, in some areas a hostile climate, and where I think the UK is not being at least as helpful as it ought to be. I think it's probably not as unhelpful as it might sometimes come across, and I think by and large the Treasury takes a sensible view here, but it's certainly not as benign as it used to be. Now, there's still massive growth going on in terms of financial assets, and we have to think about, plan how we're going to get our fair share of that. And to me, the moral is very much about identifying new markets, in Asia, maybe in the USA, and new products. And I think new products are more difficult. I certainly think there's a a much bigger market for retirement saving for expatriates. There may be a worthwhile market in reinsurance, although that would need a Solvency II program. And as I've said earlier, I think AIFMD equivalence is going to be extremely important. I was interested last week talking to a major Singapore fund to find that they were AIFM registering in London purely in order to be able to market into the EU. And again, something that needs saying, and it applies particularly to MiFID II as well as to a large extent AIFM. These are protectionist measures, make no bones about it. These are trying to keep out anyone that isn't part of the EU club or contributing to the EU club. But what we're going to need here in Guernsey, I think, is more research and is strategy for how we are going to exploit the new opportunities that there are. And I think in the context that as long as it stays with the euro, the economies of the EU are going to be in serious decline. And so really the growing market isn't in the EU, the growing market is in other parts of the world. Our key competitive advantage here is that, and fingers crossed, we have an excellent reputation for proper professional regulation, for good law, for being a clean place and a well-organized place to do business. And I think that is becoming ever more important in people's choices as to what of the international locations they use. And here I would just make the point that with all the changes going on, we do need really a consolidated, updated law, and we do need housing laws which enable both the recruitment and the retention of key skilled staff. But at the end of the day, what will matter is a well-organized, trusted, up-to-date Financial Services Commission. And I close by saying I think really Guernsey is incredibly lucky to have William leading it. I think he is someone of outstanding quality. Thank you all.